Derek Larson stood alone in the center of the arena, feeling every ounce of tension in the air. The arena was massive, stretching out in all directions like a desert of cracked, red soil. The sky above was a dull purple, and the sun, an unfamiliar orange ball, beat down mercilessly. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but his fingers ached, still unaccustomed to the weight of the alien combat suit. It wasn't much, just a simple outfit with basic armor, a few supplies, but it didn't matter. What mattered was what lay ahead. The crowd of alien spectators watched from every angle, their faces a blur of strange shapes and colors, all eagerly waiting for the spectacle to unfold. Some were humanoid, others insect-like, and some looked almost like walking rocks. There was a lot of murmuring and chattering, the sound a constant buzz in the background. Derek felt his heart racing in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what he had survived to even get here. "Human," a voice boomed from above, cutting through the murmurs. It was smooth, calm, with a slight arrogance in its tone. The voice belonged to Professor Telark, a scientist who had orchestrated this madness. He was the one who had brought Derek to this strange world, claiming it was for research. But Derek knew better. This was a test, a game, a chance for the professor and his alien colleagues to study the so-called Deathworlder, the last human. The professor's image flickered on a giant holographic screen above the arena. His voice came again, louder this time, as he addressed the crowd. "What you are about to witness is the final experiment, the ultimate test. The human, the last survivor of the Deathworld, will face the ultimate predator. Will it survive, or will it perish like all the others before it?" The professor's words were followed by a chorus of laughter, a sound full of mockery and disbelief. The crowd thought it was a joke. Derek could feel their eyes on him, judging him, their anticipation almost palpable. A cold sweat dripped down the back of his neck, but Derek refused to show fear. The professor didn't know what he was dealing with. He didn't know what humans were capable of. Earth might have been a death world, but Derek had survived it. Every day had been a fight to stay alive, to adapt, to keep going. The predator was coming. Derek's eyes snapped to the far side of the arena. A massive shadow loomed in the distance, slowly moving toward him. It was hard to see at first, just a dark shape shifting in the dim light. But as it drew closer, the details became clear and Derek's stomach churned. The predator was huge. It was taller than any creature he had ever seen, its body covered in thick reptilian armor. Its limbs were long and muscular, its claws gleaming sharp enough to cut through steel. Its head was a mix of insect and reptile, with glowing red eyes that locked onto Derek, sending a shiver down his spine. It was fast, ferocious, and completely terrifying, and it was hungry. Derek didn't move. He stood there, staring at the creature as it began to circle, its massive feet crushing the ground beneath it with each step. The crowd's laughter grew louder, the sounds of their excitement blending with the growl of the predator. Some of the aliens in the stands even jeered, calling out to the beast as if they were cheering for a gladiator match. Telark's voice came again, almost too calm. "Let's see how the human fares against the apex predator. I wonder how long he will last." The professor's words stung, but Derek didn't let them show. He had no weapon, no tools, no training to speak of. He wasn't a soldier, he was just a researcher, a human in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was one thing he had that none of these creatures could understand. He had willpower. He had grit. He had the ability to adapt and survive no matter what the odds were. The predator growled, its massive jaws snapping open and closed with a sickening sound. Derek's muscles tensed as he instinctively dropped into a crouch, his eyes never leaving the beast. Every part of his body screamed to run, but he couldn't. Running would only make him a target. He couldn't run, he couldn't fight, but he had to do something, he had to survive. The predator lunged forward with terrifying speed, its claws extending, its mouth opening wide to swallow him whole. Derek barely had time to react, but somehow he managed to dive to the side, rolling across the dirt. He came up on his feet, panting, his heart pounding in his chest. The crowd roared in excitement. Some of them had probably expected him to die instantly, but Derek wasn't going down that easily. His breathing was steady, his mind clear. He knew he couldn't let fear control him. Fear would kill him faster than any beast. The predator roared again, charging, its claws tearing through the dirt. Derek was fast, but the predator was faster. He had to think, to plan. He had to outsmart it, or else he was dead. He focused on the predator's movements, watching its every twitch, every shift. It was fast, but it was predictable. It was used to being the hunter, not the hunted. And that, Derek realized, was his advantage. The ground trembled beneath Derek's feet as the predator closed in. Its massive claws dug into the soil with a sound like thunder, the beast's eyes glowing a fiery red as it focused entirely on him. Derek's breath caught in his throat. The thing was fast, powerful, and as relentless as a storm. It wasn't just hunting him, it was enjoying the chase. Derek's mind raced. His heart hammered in his chest, but he fought to keep his thoughts clear. There was no way he could outrun the creature, not with its size and speed. And fighting it, he might as well try to punch a mountain. But he had learned something on Earth. Humans didn't survive by brute force alone. They survived by adapting, by outsmarting what seemed impossible. The predator roared again, a sound that rattled Derek's bones. It charged, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, its claws slicing the air. Derek didn't hesitate. His legs moved before his brain could even catch up. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's snapping jaws. His body slammed into the ground, the impact rattling him, but he was already rolling, moving, using the momentum to get back on his feet. The crowd above them screamed in excitement. Derek could hear their voices, their words alien and strange, but the only thing that mattered was the predator. He was the prey now. The crowd could laugh all they wanted, but this wasn't a joke to him. This was life or death. The predator didn't stop. It was relentless, its eyes fixed on Derek as it turned to face him again. It was already adjusting its attack, learning from each failed strike. It was getting smarter, but Derek wasn't going to make it easy. The beast lunged once more, its claws aimed straight at him. Derek was already moving. He dodged to the left, just as the predator's claws raked across the space where he had been a moment before. The sound of tearing stone filled the air as the creature's talons scraped against the arena floor. Derek barely had time to roll back to his feet. The air smelled like dust and heat, a mixture of fear and the stench of the beast. His eyes darted around looking for something, anything, that could give him an edge. There was nothing in sight, no weapons, no traps, just the bare, harsh landscape. He had to make use of what he had. He needed a plan. The predator seemed to sense his hesitation. It paused, its head tilting slightly as if waiting for Derek to make a move. Derek knew this was a test. The predator wasn't just hunting him for food, it was toying with him, watching how he would respond. It wanted to break him, to see him fail. But Derek wasn't broken yet. His breath came in quick bursts, but his mind stayed focused. He had survived worse. He had survived on Earth, where everything from the animals to the weather wanted him dead. He knew how to fight when there was no hope, how to think fast when every second mattered. This was no different, he just had to hold on. The predator's eyes never left him as it slowly began to circle, its massive form shifting gracefully despite its bulk. It was patient, waiting for Derek to make the first mistake. Derek felt his muscles burn, his energy draining with every movement. He couldn't keep this up forever. He had to act, and he had to act now. The predator lunged again, but this time Derek was ready. He ducked under the strike, his body moving with a fluidity that came from sheer survival instinct. The beast's claws sliced the air, narrowly missing his head. Derek's pulse raced. The moment had come. He reached out, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground as he spun. The predator's massive form loomed in front of him, too close now for a clean dodge. Derek's fingers tightened around the rock, feeling its rough edges dig into his palm. This wasn't a weapon, but it was something he could use to make a move. The predator's jaws snapped shut just as Derek thrust the rock forward. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The rock struck the creature's side with a sickening thud, hitting a weak point in its armored scales. The predator let out a roar of pain, more out of surprise than injury. Derek's heart skipped a beat. He had made it flinch. The crowd's jeers faltered. This was different. The predator's body jerked back, and Derek seized the chance. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, using his speed and the predator's momentary confusion to his advantage. He darted toward its exposed flank, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. The creature turned, its jaws snapping wildly, but Derek was already moving again, his body a blur of motion. He was too fast, too unpredictable. Derek didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. The pain in his side from where the predator's claws had raked him was starting to throb, but he couldn't slow down. Not now. Not when he was this close. The predator roared in fury, and for the first time it hesitated. It backed away slightly, confused, its glowing eyes narrowed in on Derek. The beast had expected to break him, to force him to crumble under pressure. But Derek wasn't crumbling. He was surviving. He was fighting. The crowd had gone quiet. Derek could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't care. He wasn't here to entertain them. He was here to stay alive. The predator growled, the sound low and menacing, but Derek wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He was in control now. He was the one who would decide how this ended. Derek's breath came in short, ragged gasps, his lungs burning with every inhale. He could feel the blood seeping through his suit, his body bruised and battered from the relentless attacks. His side was raw where the predator's claws had torn through him, but he couldn't afford to think about the pain. Not now. Not when he could hear the heavy steps of the beast drawing closer. The predator was no longer toying with him. It was angry. Its eyes burned with fury as it paced in front of him, its claws digging into the cracked earth. It had tasted his blood. It knew he was vulnerable. Derek's pulse hammered in his chest as he tried to steady himself. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to run, but he knew that would be his end. The predator was too fast, too strong. It would hunt him down like a shadow. He couldn't escape. But there was something else, something deeper inside him that told him he didn't need to run, that he didn't have to fight with strength alone. He had something else that the predator didn't, the ability to think, to adapt, to survive. His mind flashed back to Earth, to the countless times he had been in dangerous situations. Earth had been a death world, a planet where everything, every plant, every animal, every storm was designed to kill. Humans didn't just survive there, they adapted, they learned. Derek had survived because he understood that sometimes it wasn't about fighting back head-on. It was about using what you had and knowing your enemy better than it knew itself. The predator's eyes locked onto him, and for a moment Derek felt like prey. The beast's massive claws flexed, its mouth opening in a silent snarl, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Derek wasn't looking at the beast anymore. He was looking at its movements, its every shift and twitch. It was like a puzzle, a complex, deadly puzzle, but Derek had solved many puzzles in his life, and this one wasn't so different. The predator lunged again, its enormous body moving with lightning speed. Derek knew it was coming. He could see it in the way its muscles coiled, in the way its eyes locked onto his every movement. This time he didn't dodge. This time he stood his ground, his legs steady under him. And as the creature neared, Derek did the one thing he knew would make the difference. He waited. The predator's claws slashed through the air. Derek sidestepped just as it reached him, his body moving with the kind of precision born from desperation. The beast's claws missed by inches, crashing into the dirt with a violent force. It didn't stop. The predator's momentum carried it forward, and Derek didn't hesitate. He saw his opening. With a swift motion, he grabbed a jagged rock from the ground, using the predator's own force against it. He pushed the rock toward the beast, exposed underbelly, aiming for the weak point he had spotted earlier. His heart stopped for a brief second as he drove the stone upward. The predator roared in pain, a sound that echoed through the arena, shaking the very ground beneath them. It staggered back, its body flailing in confusion. Derek's hand shook from the effort, but his resolve only hardened. This was it. The beast was vulnerable, he could feel it. But the predator was not going to go down easily. It recovered quickly, growling in fury as it turned to face him again. Derek barely had time to react as it came at him with renewed rage. This time, the predator was quicker, angrier. Its claws slashed, faster than before, forcing Derek to keep his distance. He could see the exhaustion in the creature's movements, the way its heavy breath came in ragged gasps. It wasn't as invincible as it had seemed. Maybe it was bigger, maybe it was stronger. But Derek had one thing it didn't: resilience. He had the ability to endure, to push through when it seemed like everything was against him. The predator advanced once more, but this time Derek didn't back down. He stood tall, his body aching, his breath uneven, but his mind clear. His eyes never left the creature's every move, watching for the smallest sign of weakness. And then it happened. The predator's massive claw swiped toward him, but this time it was slower, sluggish. The creature was tiring. Its aggression had cost it. Derek moved in a blur, dodging the strike, and with a shout he darted toward its exposed side again. This time he wasn't aiming for the weak spot. This time he was aiming for something else. Derek's hand shot out, and he grabbed onto the predator's thick, armored tail. The beast roared in surprise, twisting violently to shake him off, but Derek held on, using every ounce of strength he had left. He wrapped his arms around the tail and with a grunt yanked hard. The predator's body shifted, throwing it off balance. It stumbled forward, its massive form crashing to the ground with a deafening thud. Derek didn't wait. He wasn't going to give the creature a chance to recover. Without thinking, he sprinted forward, reaching the predator's side once more. His breath was ragged, his body shaking with exhaustion, but the sight of the beast vulnerable lying on the ground spurred him on. He leapt onto its back, his hand reaching for its armored neck, and with everything he had left, he grabbed the nearest piece of exposed flesh. The predator howled, trying to throw him off, but Derek's grip was firm. He knew the one thing that had kept him alive all his life: you don't fight against an unstoppable force. You work with it. You find its weakness, its flaw, and you strike. The creature's roars grew quieter as its struggle slowed, its movements less frantic. The predator wasn't just slowing down, it was realizing something that had never occurred to it before. It was no longer in control. For the first time since this fight began, the predator stopped fighting. Its muscles went limp, and it lay still on the ground, its heavy breaths echoing like a distant drum. Derek released his grip, his body collapsing beside the beast. His heart hammered in his chest as he tried to catch his breath. He had done it. He had won. Against all odds, against a creature that should have torn him apart, he had survived. And in that moment, as the crowd fell silent, Derek realized something important. Surviving wasn't just about strength. It was about enduring, about finding a way when there seemed to be none. It was about using your brain, your heart, and above all, your humanity. Derek's chest heaved with every breath. His limbs were heavy, his body bruised, his mind running on fumes. He had done it. He had survived the impossible. The predator, the towering beast that had hunted him without mercy, lay still on the ground. Its massive body heaved with shallow breaths, a sign that the fight had drained it more than Derek had expected. It was no longer the terrifying creature that had stalked him relentlessly. Now, it was just another beast that had underestimated its prey. But Derek didn't feel relief. He didn't feel victory, not yet. The battle was over, but there was still something unsettling in the air, a weight that pressed down on him. He kept his distance from the creature, watching it closely, just in case it tried to strike again. His eyes flicked nervously toward the stands, where the crowd of alien spectators had gone unnervingly quiet. Their roars of excitement had faded into stunned silence. Derek couldn't tell if they were amazed, disappointed, or just confused. Then came a voice, a cold, distant voice that broke the silence like a blade through water. "Well done, human," Professor Telark's voice boomed over the arena, calm as ever. "But it seems you've forgotten something." There was a sharpness in his tone now, a hint of anger beneath the smooth, confident exterior. "This test is not over. The predator has been subdued, yes, but it has not been defeated. Do not think this moment of triumph will save you." Derek's heart skipped a beat. He was still catching his breath, still feeling the pounding of his heart in his chest, but the professor's words hit him like a punch to the gut. Something was wrong. As if on cue, the ground beneath them trembled once more. The predator's body twitched, a low growl rising from deep within its throat. Derek's eyes widened. Was it getting back up? Had all of this been for nothing? But then something else happened. The predator's eyes flickered open, its gaze locking onto Derek. But it wasn't the same predatory hunger he had seen before. It was something else. A flicker of hesitation, confusion, fear. The predator struggled to push itself up, its claws scraping against the dirt, but it couldn't seem to find its balance. It growled again, but this time the sound was less certain, less threatening. Derek stared at the beast, his mind racing. He had no idea what was happening. Had he somehow calmed it? That couldn't be possible, could it? He had been fighting for his life, every muscle in his body screaming for him to survive. But there had been moments, fleeting moments, when he had seen something in the creature's eyes, something not entirely animal. He took a cautious step forward, unsure of what to do next. The predator's head turned toward him again, its large, glowing eyes following his every move. But this time it didn't lunge, it didn't snarl, it just watched. The crowd, still silent, was as confused as he was. He could feel their eyes on him, but he couldn't afford to look away from the beast. It was like he had reached a strange impasse. The predator, once an unstoppable force of nature, was now caught between two instincts, the instinct to attack and the instinct to withdraw. Telark's voice came again, filled with growing frustration. "You think you've won? You think you've tamed it? Foolish human, the predator is a force of nature, not something you can simply calm. You are nothing compared to it." But Derek didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed locked on the creature in front of him. He wasn't thinking about the professor or the crowd. He wasn't even thinking about survival. He was thinking about connection. There had been something in the way the predator had hesitated, something in the way it had paused before attacking. And that something stirred a strange feeling in Derek, a deep understanding of just how similar they really were. The Predator was not just a mindless killer. It was a creature that had been conditioned by its world to survive by any means. It had no place for mercy, no place for hesitation. And yet here it was, hesitating. Derek exhaled slowly, steadying his breath. He wasn't sure how or why, but something had clicked. Maybe it was the way the Predator had watched him before the final strike, how it had observed him. Maybe it was the strange, primal energy that pulsed between them, the same energy he had felt on Earth when facing danger, when facing the wild creatures that wanted him dead. He stepped closer, his body tense but his movements calm. He wasn't running. He wasn't retreating. He was meeting the beast halfway, showing it that he wasn't just some prey to be devoured. He was not an enemy, but a being just like it, surviving, enduring, fighting for his place in the world. The Predator's eyes flickered, the fierce red glow fading into something softer, something almost curious. Derek took another step forward, reaching out his hand slowly, offering peace. "Easy, big guy," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "I'm not your enemy." To his surprise, the Predator didn't charge. It didn't attack. Instead, it seemed to lower its massive head slightly, its sharp claws retracting ever so slightly. The growl from its throat softened, turning into a low, almost rumbling sound. It was not the roar of a beast ready to strike. It was something else, something close to a sound of understanding. The crowd remained eerily silent. They had never seen anything like this. They had seen humans fight before, but they had never seen a human do this. Professor T-Lark's voice crackled over the loudspeaker again, but now there was a noticeable crack in his tone. This can't be. A human calming the Predator? Impossible. But Derek wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on the creature, the Predator, the one that had hunted him and almost killed him. He had survived this fight not by strength, not by skill, but by something deeper. By the will to understand, to endure, and to find a way to connect, even with a creature that had no reason to care. The Predator's eyes met his, and for the first time since the battle began, it did not seem like an enemy. It seemed like a fellow survivor. Derek stood in the arena, his hand still outstretched toward the Predator. The crowd above was unnervingly quiet, the roar of excitement that had once filled the air now replaced by an eerie stillness. The professor's voice was silent, his earlier jeering completely absent. Derek could hear his own heartbeat, strong and steady, but the rest of the world seemed frozen in time. The Predator's massive head was lowered slightly, its red eyes still locked onto him. It was no longer growling, no longer lunging. Its body was still and cautious, the glowing eyes scanning him as though it were trying to decide whether to trust him or kill him. Derek wasn't sure why he was doing this. His muscles screamed with exhaustion, his wounds stung with every breath, but he couldn't look away from the creature. His fingers trembled slightly as he held out his hand. He didn't know if it would work. Hell, he didn't even know why he was trying, but something deep inside him knew this was the only way. It had to be. The Predator let out a low rumble, a sound that seemed to reverberate in the bones of the arena. Derek froze, every muscle tense. For a moment, the air felt thick, heavy with uncertainty. Then, slowly, the Predator's head lowered further, its massive eyes softening, the aggression in them slowly fading away. Derek took a cautious step forward, his voice low. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Predator blinked slowly, and Derek wasn't sure, but he thought it might have been understanding. He kept his voice steady, trying to convey calm. "I know what you're feeling," he said softly. "I know what it's like to fight for your life, but I'm not your enemy." He took another step. The Predator shifted, its claws clicking softly against the ground, but it didn't retreat. It didn't advance either. It just stood there watching Derek as though it was listening. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating, but Derek didn't back down. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to run, to be ready for an attack, but he couldn't. He had to trust this. He had to believe that there was more to the Predator than just hunger, just violence. For the first time in his life, Derek realized something. He wasn't fighting the beast anymore. He wasn't trying to destroy it or outsmart it. He was trying to understand it. He was trying to connect. He slowly lowered his hand, careful not to make any sudden movements, and spoke again. "You've fought your whole life to survive. So have I." The Predator made a sound deep in its throat, not quite a growl but a soft vibration, as if considering his words. Derek held his breath, waiting, unsure of what would happen next. The arena felt impossibly still, the distant hum of the audience only faintly audible. It was as if the entire universe had stopped, holding its breath along with him. And then, with a soft grunt, the predator took a slow step toward him. Derek's heart skipped in his chest. The massive creature was coming closer, its steps heavy and deliberate, yet without the rush of violence he had feared. It was acknowledging him, it was giving him a chance. Derek didn't move. He didn't even breathe for a moment, not wanting to ruin this fragile moment. The predator was near now, its body towering over him, the heat from its massive form warming his skin. The air smelled like earth and the faint scent of the creature's alien blood, but Derek barely noticed. It stopped just a few feet away, lowering its head so that its glowing eyes were level with his. The tension in the air was palpable. Derek's pulse thundered in his ears, but he held his ground. This was the moment where everything could either shatter or change forever. He swallowed hard, not knowing what else to say, but knowing this was all about trust. In the wild, in life, trust was the difference between life and death. Maybe it was foolish, but Derek couldn't see another way. He took a small step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not so different, you and I, we both fight. We both survive. That's all we've ever known." The predator blinked again, its massive head tilting slightly as if it were processing his words. Derek's heart was pounding now, the blood rushing in his veins. Was this really happening? Could he be calming it? A strange stillness settled over the arena, the quiet so deep that Derek could hear the subtle movements of the predator's breath. The creature took a final step toward him, and for the briefest of moments, Derek was sure it was going to strike. But instead it paused, its eyes locking onto his. There was no anger in them anymore, no hunger, just a strange sense of curiosity, like it was trying to understand him as much as he was trying to understand it. Derek's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what was happening. Maybe he had done something impossible. Maybe he had just turned the predator into something else, but he couldn't let it go. Not now, not when they had come this far. He took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to exhale slowly. "You don't have to fight anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with something stronger than fear. "You don't have to be alone." The predator's eyes softened again, its massive head moving down slightly, its body still and heavy. Derek knew it wasn't completely over. The creature wasn't entirely tame. Its instincts, its nature were still there. But for this one moment they had found something in each other. A pause in the endless battle for survival. It was a small thing, but it was a start. And in that fragile silence, Derek realized that survival wasn't always about winning. It was about finding a way to live, a way to connect, even with something as fearsome as this. He stepped back slowly, keeping his eyes on the predator. The beast didn't follow, it just watched him, its deep red eyes steady and thoughtful. For the first time since he had arrived on this planet, Derek felt like he might have just made an ally out of the impossible. Derek stood in the center of the arena, his body aching, his limbs trembling with exhaustion, but his mind was clear. The predator, once a ferocious hunter, now stood still before him, its massive head lowered in a quiet, almost respectful gesture. Its glowing eyes, once filled with hatred and hunger, now seemed calmer, softer. It was still a dangerous creature, its power undiminished, but for the first time it wasn't a threat. Not to Derek, anyway. He didn't know how this had happened, how he had managed to reach the creature, to connect with it in a way that no one, human or alien, thought possible. But there it was. The beast was no longer the killer it had been when it first emerged from the shadows of the arena. The silence stretched on, longer than any moment Derek had ever experienced. The crowd, silent now, waited, but Derek didn't look up at them. He didn't need to. His focus was solely on the predator before him. His breath was steady, his heart still pounding from the battle, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something deeper, relief, understanding. And then the unexpected happened. A sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, just a low hum. But then the hum grew louder, more distinct, until it became a voice, sharp and commanding, Professor Telark's voice. This is not possible," the professor muttered, his tone filled with disbelief and frustration. "The human has tamed it." Derek's eyes flicked toward the holographic screen above the arena where the professor's image was flickering, his hands tightly gripping the edge of the control panel. His face was twisted into a scowl, his eyes wide with anger, as though everything he believed had just been shattered. "This cannot be allowed," Telark continued, his voice thick with irritation. "You human are an anomaly. You've ruined everything." Derek's pulse quickened again, the anger in the professor's voice sending a shiver down his spine. He had known that this was not a simple test. It was a cruel game. The aliens wanted to prove that humans, Deathworlders as they called them, were nothing but weak creatures, easily overcome. But Derek hadn't just survived. He had proven that survival wasn't about strength. It was about something more. It was about connection. And now it seemed like T-Lark's plan was falling apart, his perfect experiment shattered by the very creature meant to destroy him. Derek didn't respond to the professor. His eyes were still fixed on the predator who stood before him, its massive form oddly still, its glowing eyes fixed on Derek's face. The creature was no longer a mindless killer. It was something else, something more. The professor's voice continued, rising in frustration, but Derek barely heard it anymore. He had done what no one thought was possible. He had found a way to connect with the predator, not by fighting it, but by understanding it. And now the real test was beginning. The predator's massive head moved slightly, its glowing eyes flicking toward T-Lark's image on the screen. For a brief moment, Derek thought the creature might respond with another burst of violence. But it didn't. It merely observed, its head tilting ever so slightly, like it was considering the words it had just heard. Derek stepped forward cautiously, his voice quiet but firm. "I didn't tame it," he said, his words carrying across the arena. "I just showed it that it doesn't have to fight, it doesn't have to be alone." There was a pause, a moment of stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. Derek felt every eye in the arena on him, but he didn't care. The predator hadn't attacked, it hadn't killed him, and that was all that mattered. T-Lark's voice crackled again, this time full of rage. "This is an abomination. You, human, are nothing but an experiment, a tool for us to study. You are not meant to do this. You are not meant to survive." Derek's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. The professor's words stung, but Derek didn't flinch. He knew what he had done. He didn't need T-Lark's approval. He didn't need anyone's approval. He had earned his survival. And more importantly, he had earned the respect of the predator standing before him. He turned back to the creature, his voice soft but strong. "You don't need to be a weapon anymore. You're not just a monster. You're a survivor just like me." The predator's eyes flashed again, and for the briefest of moments, Derek thought he saw something in them. Something that wasn't rage. Something that was understanding. It was as if the creature had heard him, as if it had understood in some strange, unspoken way what he was trying to say. The predator let out a low growl, but it wasn't the same sound as before. It was quieter, more like a hum of agreement. Then, to Derek's surprise, it took a slow step back, its claws scraping softly against the dirt as it lowered its head again. It wasn't retreating. It wasn't running away. It was just standing there. T-Lark's voice suddenly stopped, and the holographic image flickered out, leaving the arena in silence once again. Derek stood there for a moment, his hands still extended, his eyes locked on the creature. It was still a wild animal, a dangerous force of nature. But in that moment, it wasn't a threat. It was just another creature trying to survive. A creature that had, for the first time, found a reason to stop fighting. The crowd in the stands was still silent, unsure of what had just happened. Derek could feel their eyes on him, but it didn't matter. They didn't understand what he had done, what he had shown them, and maybe they never would. But he understood, and for the first time since he'd arrived on this strange world, he knew he had done something important, something that had nothing to do with winning or losing. It had to do with surviving. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the first step toward something better, something more than just a battle for survival, something where understanding, not violence, could make all the difference. The predator took another slow step back, its massive form still towering over Derek, but for the first time it wasn't a threat. It was just a survivor. And Derek, in that moment, realized that he wasn't alone anymore. The arena was eerily silent, the kind of silence that felt thick and suffocating, as though the entire universe had paused to witness what was unfolding. Derek stood at the center, his hands still slightly extended toward the predator, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. His body ached, bruised and battered from the battle, but his mind was clear. He had done what no one thought possible. He had survived. Not just survived, he had connected. The predator, the terrifying beast that had once been a force of nature, now stood still before him, its massive body looming, but no longer with the intent to strike. The creature's glowing eyes, once filled with primal hunger, now held something different. There was a flicker of understanding, of recognition. For the first time, the two of them weren't enemies. They were survivors, bound by something deeper than the fight for dominance. Derek didn't know what had changed in the predator. Maybe it had seen something in him. Maybe it had sensed something in itself. But whatever it was, it had worked. The creature had stepped back. It wasn't charging anymore. It wasn't roaring in fury. It was simply waiting, watching. But that wasn't the only change. Derek's eyes slowly moved from the creature to the holographic screen above the arena. The crowd had been quiet since T-Lark's angry outburst. But now, they were watching intently, their collective gaze a mix of confusion and awe. The same aliens who had expected him to die were now seeing something completely different. T-Lark's image flickered back to life, but this time, his voice was different. Gone was the smug superiority, the sneer in his tone. Now there was only a note of disbelief. What have you done?" T-Lark's voice cracked as it came through the speakers. "You were supposed to fail. This wasn't part of the experiment." Derek felt the anger in T-Lark's words, but he didn't let it affect him. He didn't need the professor's approval. He had proven his point, and he didn't need to justify himself to anyone. "I haven't done anything," Derek said, his voice steady and calm. "I just showed it that there's another way, a way that doesn't involve killing or fighting or surviving by brute force." T-Lark's silence spoke louder than any words. Derek could almost feel the professor's confusion, his inability to understand what had just happened. For the aliens, for the professor, survival was about dominance. It was about proving strength, but Derek knew better. He had learned that survival wasn't just about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about finding a way to live, no matter the odds. It was about resilience. About finding a reason to survive, even when there seemed to be no hope left. For a moment, the professor didn't respond. Derek could feel the tension hanging in the air, but it wasn't the same tension as before. It was different now. It was the tension of something new, something unexpected. He had survived, and he had changed the rules. Finally, T-Lark's voice returned, quieter now, tinged with frustration. "This is an anomaly, a mistake. You shouldn't have done this." Derek's jaw clenched, but he didn't back down. "You can't control everything, Professor. Not everything can be measured or predicted. I'm not a mistake, and neither is the predator." The crowd, still quiet, shifted slightly, some exchanging uncertain glances, others watching Derek as though he were something they couldn't quite understand. The alien species had come here expecting a fight, a spectacle, and Derek had given them something they couldn't wrap their minds around. A victory not by force, but by empathy, by understanding. The predator, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere, took a few slow steps back. It wasn't retreating, but it was giving space. It was no longer a looming threat. It was just standing there, watching. Derek's heart raced, but not from fear, from a kind of quiet triumph. He had come to this alien world as an experiment, a subject for the aliens to observe. They had underestimated him. They had thought that because he was human, because he came from a world that had made survival a fight against everything, he would be easy to break. But Derek wasn't like that. No human was. "We're not your experiments, T-Lark," Derek said, his voice growing stronger with every word. "We're not just things for you to study. We're survivors, and maybe you need to start thinking that way, too." For a long moment, there was only silence. The predator remained still, its massive form unthreatening. The crowd was watching, unsure how to react. T-Lark's image flickered again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, something that looked almost like hesitation. I don't understand," T-Lark said quietly. "You've made a mockery of everything we've studied. You've proven that. Maybe there's more to survival than we thought." Derek didn't answer. There was nothing more to say. He had already shown them everything they needed to see. The predator wasn't a mindless killer. It was a creature that had learned to survive in a harsh world just like him, just like every human. And maybe, just maybe, the predators of this galaxy could learn that they didn't have to kill to survive. Slowly, Derek took another step forward. The predator didn't move, but it didn't retreat either. It was watching him, waiting. He reached out his hand again, not toward the creature, but toward the rest of the arena, toward the alien audience who had come to see him die. "Maybe this is the future," Derek said, his voice soft but firm. "Maybe we don't have to fight all the time. Maybe we can start working together." For the first time, he allowed himself a small smile. The predator's eyes blinked slowly, its body relaxed in a way that seemed almost peaceful. The arena was still, but now it felt different. The tension was gone, and in its place was something new, a sense of possibility, a sense of change. The crowd remained silent, but Derek didn't need their applause. He didn't need anyone to agree with him. He had proven his point. And for the first time since arriving on this strange, alien world, Derek Larson felt something he hadn't expected to feel: hope.